Continuing on with my Fast and Furious rewatch and reviews, I am now up to the third movie in the franchise, the Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift. Now, this is without a doubt probably the weirdest entry in the entire series, mainly because of how different it is than the first two movies, but also because of how the series has chosen to utilize this particular entry as we move forward. Just off the top, want to let you guys know this is going to have some spoilers. So if you have not seen Tokyo Drift, definitely check it out and then come back to the review and, listen to the thoughts. But yeah, so with Tokyo Drift, this is the first entry that we no longer have Paul Walker or Vin Diesel. Neither one of them returned for this one, despite a very brief cameo from Vin Diesel at the end of the movie. But beside that, this is, we're going in not only a whole new location once again, but now we're following a new character who we've never met. And the basis of this movie kind of falls all on his shoulders. I've always had a love-hate relationship with this movie, which is kind of weird because I've never overly loved this movie, but I've never outright just hated this movie either. It's always kind of fallen somewhere in the middle. And it's one that I do enjoy, but it's kind of a middle of the pack movie for the entire series. And most of that is because of the lead here, who is Lucas Black, a guy who, let's just say, is not the greatest actor in the world, but he has a certain charm to his presence that allows him to actually be somewhat likable in this movie. And it's weird because you absolutely do not want to like his character just because of how he acts, but he actually does a decent to okay job in this movie. And like I said, the weight of this movie is all on him. And he carries it fairly well. I think the biggest thing this movie has going for it is Tokyo, like literally Tokyo, the country, and just everything that it does as far as embracing Tokyo is what this movie excels at. From the cars to the scenery to the way they interact with people and the way people are dressed, and we get invested and engulfed in this culture, I think is the biggest selling point for this movie, because everything else to varying degrees is not nearly as good. Case in point, Lucas Black, who, like I said, is not the greatest actor in the world, but somehow in this movie he comes off as a pretty decent leading man, despite giving some absolutely atrocious line deliveries. And honestly, the dialogue in this particular entry is not the greatest in its own right. So I don't even know if somebody who is a more seasoned or better actor could make these lines sound good. But nonetheless, he's not bad. The rest of the cast here is pretty solid. This is the introduction, of course, to Han, played by Sung Kang, who is without a doubt one of the best characters in the entire franchise, but also the character that is the most complexing because this is the movie where he dies. It's the third entry, but then it gets retconned in the next movie because the next three movies all chronologically take place before this movie, which makes absolutely no sense. But it was their way of taking a really cool character in Han and making him last longer in the series. And now, as of part 9, he's no longer dead and is completely alive. And we'll get into all that when we get to those reviews. But it's something they wanted to do, and I don't know if he's that great of a character to go out of the way to do all this retconning and changing of the timeline to allow for his character to be in more entries. Again, he's cool, but I mean, is it worth doing all that? I don't know. But at the end of the day, he does a good job. You also have Bow Wow, who has never been the greatest actor ever, but for a former rapper turned actor, he's not bad here. His character Twinkie is definitely an interesting person to throw into the mix of all this, and he's a decent little sidekick to Lucas Black's character Sean. Everybody else here, though, more or less is kind of forgettable. Will say Brian T, who plays the villain, is actually probably one of the better villains thus far in the series. I think he does a better job than the two villains we get in part one and part two. And I think him being involved with the Yakuza helps a lot of that. Um, so he has that going for him. And his uncle is played by Sonny Chiba, which is absolutely crazy that he's in this movie. But his entrance and his whole cameo, for the most part, is pretty great. The main girl in this movie, Natalie Kelly, I believe is how you pronounce her name, absolutely forgettable. They give her nothing to do in this movie. And not to say that she's necessarily doing a bad job, but they really don't give anything to this character. And she is absolutely forgettable. On a positive note, some of the things that really do work in this movie, this is probably the most invested it gets in the car culture. This movie is all about cars. It's all about racing. It's about drifting, and it's about making, all that look cool and interesting. And that's one of the better aspects of this movie. Where I said in the first two movie reviews, the car racing aspect doesn't interest me as much as what's going on outside of everything. This is the only one where I think the racing actually shines very well. The way they mix it with everything else, I think works here and does a better job than in those first two entries, because you're seeing a lot more of the culture. You're getting more invested in it, and these characters are more invested in it seems like, than with the previous two entries. So I think a lot of that attests to what makes this movie more enjoyable in certain aspects, especially coming from like Too Fast, Too Furious, where it was just like, hey, we're undercover, we've got this new wisecracking sidekick, we're going to be doing all this crazy stuff. This one still has some ridiculous moments and some comedy and whatnot, but it tries to play things a little more seriously, but to the point where it doesn't get overly serious, like we'll talk about in my next review. But it has a good balance and a good mixture of zany, crazy, funny stuff, but good action. And when it gets into the dramatic bits, it's serious enough in those moments, but it doesn't get overly dramatic or anything like that, which is nice to see. But yeah, I mean, with Tokyo Drift, like I said, it's a movie that's not necessarily one of the best in the series, but it works well enough and has enough going for it to make it enjoyable and worthwhile. Overall, I would give it a 6.5 out of 10. It's, like I said, it's kind of in the middle of the pack for me for this series, but I know it's a cult and a fan favorite for a lot of people. And it's the most like one-off movie out of this entire series, excluding obviously Hobbs and Shaw, which is barely a Fast and Furious movie in its own right. This is the one that could kind of fit in its own universe without even connecting it to the rest of the series. Despite, Vin Diesel's cameo at the end. That's about it for me, guys. If you have seen the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, please let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more reviews and for the rest of my Fast and Furious recap, leading all the way up to the release of Fast X. I'll leave all my links down below on where you can follow me and check out more of my reviews. And until next time, I will catch you all later.